It was a Saturday in September, late golden light across Siskiyou Street, and I was carrying 2 bags of groceries up Lena's porch steps. Her wrist was acting up. She had asked me to help. She stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, sunlight falling through her hair. I set the bags on the counter. The baguette in the paper sack was still warm. When I turned around, she was right there, eyes locked on mine. She said quietly, "You're the only man I let inside." I didn't move, not because the words were strange, but because of how she said them. Like a confession she had been holding for far too long. Let me go back about 6 months. My name is Garrett Hollis. I was 38 years old, and I lived alone in a craftsman house on Siskiyou Street in Ashland, Oregon, a small town in the southern part of the state that most people know for its Shakespeare Festival, and not much else. The house was my father's, Ray Hollis. He passed away 3 years before this story begins. He left me the place, the workshop in the garage, and a hand plane he had used for over 40 years. The handle was worn smooth in 2 spots, one from his left thumb, one from his right palm. I never touched those spots. They were his fingerprints in wood, and I left them alone. I was a furniture restorer by trade. People brought me things they were ready to throw away: oak dining tables with deep water rings, Victorian side chairs with cracked spindles, walnut dressers with drawers that wouldn't open, and I brought them back, stripped the old finish, repaired what was broken, applied a new coat and let it dry. My father taught me the work when I was a boy. He used to say the wood remembers what it was. Your job is to listen, not to decide. I had been divorced from Monica for 2 years by then. No children. We were married for 5 years, and by the end, she told me I lived like I was hiding from something. Maybe she was right. She left me for a man named Doug Kessler, a marketing director who wore fitted suits and knew how to live out loud, how to post and share and be seen by the world. He was everything I wasn't. I didn't blame her for choosing him. I didn't blame anyone. I just got quieter. The day Lena Caldwell moved in next door, I was on my front porch sanding an oak cabinet I had picked up from an estate sale outside of Medford. A moving truck pulled up around noon. I watched her carry boxes in by herself, no one helping, no family, no friends waiting on the sidewalk. She made trip after trip, her jaw tight, her steps fast. I walked over and asked if she needed a hand. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm always fine." I nodded and went back to my sanding. But that evening, I left a baguette on her front porch, wrapped in brown paper, still warm from the bakery downtown. It was something my father had taught me, a habit I never questioned. "New neighbor," he used to say. "Bread first, questions later." I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. I just left the bread and went inside. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed things. Lena locked her front door early every evening. Sometimes before the sun went down. She never invited anyone inside, not the mail carrier, not the woman from across the street who brought over a welcome pie. She accepted the pie on the porch, thanked her warmly, and closed the door before the woman had finished saying goodbye. I recognized something in the way she moved, not rudeness, but something closer to survival. She was afraid. I just didn't know of what. Here is what I did not know at the time, what I am telling you now, because you deserve to understand it before I did. Lena Caldwell already knew my name before she moved into that house. She had searched for the property next to mine specifically. She had chosen it on purpose. Her being my neighbor was not a coincidence. It was a decision made months before the moving truck arrived. But the reason behind that decision, the real one, would take me a long time to understand. And when I finally did, it changed everything I thought I knew about love, about trust, and about the quiet way my father touched lives he never knew he was touching. He used to say, "You don't need to know anybody's story, just leave the bread at the door. If they want to tell you, they'll knock." Lena knocked on my front door 2 weeks after she moved in. It started small. A knock on a Tuesday evening, Lena on my porch, asking if she could borrow a hammer. I handed her one without asking what for. She brought it back the next morning, handle wiped clean, and said thank you like she meant it more than the word usually carries. A few days after that, she asked if I could look at a window hinge that had been sticking. I walked over, adjusted the screws, and came home. No small talk, no lingering, just the errand, then the quiet, then the food started arriving. A glass container of tomato soup on my porch one morning, still warm, a tray of blueberry muffins the following week, wrapped in foil with a small note that didn't say anything, just a drawing of a loaf of bread. I kept that note. I still have it. And then, one Sunday, I found a baguette on my front step. Homemade, lopsided, cracked along the top, slightly underbaked in the center, but unmistakably a baguette. I didn't know it then, but she had taught herself to bake bread because of the loaf I had left on her porch that first night. She never mentioned it. I found out much later, and when I did, I had to sit down on the edge of my workbench and hold still for a while. Every week after that, a baguette crossed the fence between our houses. Sometimes mine to hers, sometimes hers to mine. It became a rhythm, a back and forth we never discussed, never named, just bread appearing at the door, wrapped in paper, still warm. Like a conversation that didn't need words, Lena started sitting on my porch in the evenings while I worked in the garage with the door open. She would bring a cup of chamomile tea and sit on the top step, her back against the railing, watching me sand or glue or clamp a broken joint back together. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her questions caught me off guard, not about what I was making, but about why, about my father, about the hand plane, about why I kept saving things other people had given up on. So I told her. I told her how my father's workshop smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, how he used to hum the same 3 bars of a melody I never learned the name of while he worked. I told her about the last table he ever made, a simple pine kitchen table with tapered legs, nothing ornate, but the joinery was perfect. He finished it 2 months before he passed. I never sold it. It sat in my living room, and I ate every meal at it alone, running my hand along the edge before I sat down, the way you might touch someone's shoulder when you walk past them. Lena listened in a way I had never experienced before. She didn't nod politely. She didn't say "I'm so sorry," or "that must have been hard." She listened like she was absorbing every word, storing each detail in a place she had already prepared, like what I said mattered not just to the moment, but to something much larger she was building inside herself. I didn't know what that something was, but I could feel its weight. One rainy evening in October, she knocked and asked if I could fix a pipe under her kitchen sink. "A slow leak," she said. I grabbed my tools and walked over. It was the first time I had ever been inside her house. The place was nearly empty. No photographs on the walls, no paintings, no prints, no decorations of any kind, just books stacked on the floor along the baseboards, lined up on windowsills, piled on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker, and in the corner of the living room, standing upright with its handle extended, was a suitcase, closed, ready, like it was waiting by the front door for a signal to leave. She lived like a woman who had not yet decided whether to stay. I fixed the pipe. It took about 20 minutes, a loose-fitting, easy repair. When I stood up and wiped my hands, she was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, watching me. She said quietly, "Thank you. I'm not used to letting anyone in here." I understood what she meant. She wasn't talking about plumbers. I saw that suitcase 3 more times over the next month. Always in the same corner. Always upright, handle extended, ready to roll. She never mentioned it. I never asked. But every time I saw it, something in my chest pulled tight. Not anxiety exactly, but the instinct I get when I see a hairline crack running through a board I am trying to save. You know the crack is there. You know you cannot force it shut. You work around it. Apply the glue carefully, clamp it gently, and wait. Now, I need to tell you something I didn't learn until much later, something Lena had been keeping from me for reasons that, once I understood them, I could not bring myself to blame her for. Lena grew up in Portland, Oregon. But every summer, from the time she was a small girl until she was a teenager, she came to Ashland to stay with her grandmother, a woman named Mrs. Caldwell, who lived on this very street. The house her grandmother owned was the same house Lena now lived in, the one right next to mine. When Lena was 14 years old, her grandmother got sick, seriously sick, and Lena spent that entire summer in Ashland taking care of her, mostly alone. One afternoon, my father saw her sitting by herself on the front porch, staring at the street. He walked over. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer condolences. He just said, "You want to see something?" and led her into his workshop. He showed her the difference between oak and pine by the grain pattern. He let her hold the hand plane, the same one that now sat on my workbench, handle worn smooth, and while she stood there, turning it over in her small hands, he told her about his son, about me. "Garrett," he said. "He's quiet, but he's good. Like pine. Soft, but it doesn't break." She carried that sentence with her for 15 years. At 22, her grandmother passed away. Lena sold the house, left Ashland, and moved to Portland. She built a career as a freelance editor. She lived alone, then she met a man, and over the course of 4 years, that man dismantled her, piece by piece, not with his fists. With control, he decided what she ate, who she called, when she left the apartment, and when she came back. By the end, she told me she didn't recognize the sound of her own voice. She left him at 31 with nothing but that suitcase and a memory of a workshop that smelled like pine. She remembered the old man who had shown her kindness without being asked. She remembered what he said about his son. She found her way back to Siskiyou Street. Ray Hollis was gone, but his son was still there, still quiet, still sanding oak on the front porch. None of this was something I knew yet. All I knew was that sitting with Lena on the porch felt like something I had been missing for a long time. Her tea smelled like chamomile, and her laugh rare as it was sounded like someone exhaling after holding their breath for years. One evening I handed her a cup of tea and our fingers brushed. She pulled her hand back fast, like she had touched a hot stove. Then she looked down and said, "Sorry, I'm not used to that." I didn't understand then why closeness frightened her so much. But I thought about the suitcase. And I didn't press. She asked me once, while I was oiling the hand plane late in the evening, "What did your father say about this thing?" I told her what he always said. He told me it was older than him and more loyal than anyone he ever knew. Lena looked down at her hands and was quiet for a moment. "I like people who stay loyal to old things," she said. I didn't respond, but something moved in me, something that had been still for a very long time. Not love, not yet. Just the quiet possibility that I might not always eat dinner alone at that pine table. Month 4. Monica showed up without warning. She and Doug Kessler were in southern Oregon looking at vacation properties. Doug had some plan about buying a weekend house near the Rogue Valley, and Monica decided to swing by my place on Siskiyou Street to have a grown-up conversation. That is what she called it. I knew what it actually was. Monica did not have conversations. She had inspections. She walked through my front door like she still owned the place, eyes scanning every surface the way they always did, looking for evidence that I had either moved on or fallen apart. She wanted to find one or the other. I was never sure which, but when her gaze landed on the baguette sitting on the windowsill, the one Lena had baked that morning, still dusted with flour, wrapped in a towel, she stopped. Then she turned and looked out the window at the house next door, where Lena was on her porch, watering the flower boxes she had planted a few weeks earlier. Monica knew immediately. Not because she was particularly perceptive, but because she knew me. Garrett Hollis did not keep fresh bread in his house unless someone else put it there. She turned back to me with a half smile I remembered too well, the one she put on right before she took something apart. "The neighbor?" she said. "Seriously, Garrett, you've barely been divorced 2 years and already—" I cut her off. "She's my neighbor. She brings me bread sometimes. That's it." Monica's laugh was short and sharp, like a cabinet door snapping shut. "Right," she said. "That's always how it starts with you. Quiet, invisible, and then suddenly, you're in the middle of something you can't explain." She walked around my kitchen slowly, running her fingertips along the counter, touching the flour dust left on the paper towel, looking at things the way a detective examines a room. Then she picked up her purse and left. I thought it was over. It was not over. Monica was a public relations strategist by profession, finding information about people, shaping narratives, deploying facts at the right moment for maximum impact. That was not a side skill for her. It was her career. And within 1 week, she had done exactly what she did best. She dug into Lena Caldwell's background and assembled a story that, pulled out of context and laid flat on a table, looked deeply unsettling. She came back on a Wednesday. She sat at my kitchen table, the pine table my father built, and laid out her findings with the calm precision of a prosecutor presenting exhibits. Screenshots of a real estate inquiry Lena had made about the house next to mine, dated 4 months before she moved in, a browser history showing that Lena had specifically searched for properties on Siskiyou Street in Ashland, not just anywhere in southern Oregon. Records showing she had contacted the listing agent for that house and only that house. And then the photograph pulled from a personal blog Lena used to keep years earlier, showing my father's workshop taken from the angle of her grandmother's yard, the workbench visible through the side fence. The caption underneath read, "The place I keep coming back to in my mind." Monica folded her hands on the table and looked at me with absolute certainty. "She's a stalker, Garrett," she said. "She didn't fall in love with you. She targeted you. She moved here with a plan. She researched you. She found the property, and she set this entire thing up from the start. None of this is a coincidence. Not the bread. Not the porch. None of it." I was standing by the counter. My hand was resting inches from the baguette Lena had baked that morning. I could see the flour dusted on the brown paper wrapping. I could smell the bread, warm, yeasty, faintly sweet, and for the first time in 4 months, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not anger, not certainty in the other direction, just doubt. Doubt like a crack running silently through the center of a board you thought was perfectly solid. I didn't argue with Monica. I didn't defend Lena. I didn't say anything at all. I stood there, turning the question over in my mind the way I turn a piece of wood, checking every angle and edge for hidden flaws. Was it possible? Could the silence I had taken for trust actually be something engineered? Were the baguettes and the tea and the long, quiet evenings on the porch, was all of it choreographed? That evening, I walked over to Lena's porch. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam anything. I stood on her front step with my hands in my jacket pockets and asked her one question, one word at a time, slow and steady. "Lena, did you know my father?" She was standing just inside the screen door. The porch light was behind me, and her face was half in shadow. She looked at me for a long time, long enough that I heard the wind pushing through the trees along the street, and a car passing 2 blocks over. Her eyes turned red, not from anger, from something much older and heavier than anger. Something she had been carrying with her since before she arrived on this street. She said one word, "Yes." Then she stepped back and quietly closed the door. 3 days passed, no knock on my door, no baguette on the porch. Her kitchen light stayed dark each evening. I could see it from my living room window, and the absence of that warm glow felt like a sound that had stopped. I walked past her house every morning and every evening, and the only sign she was still there was the suitcase visible through the front window, no longer in its usual corner, but dragged to the center of the living room floor. She was either packing or deciding whether to pack, or maybe she wanted me to see it to understand that she would disappear without argument, if that was what I needed from her. My own kitchen felt hollow. The counter was empty. No bread, no flour dust, no warm towel folded by the sink. The house smelled like sawdust and nothing else. No chamomile, no yeast, no warmth from next door drifting through the walls. I sat at my father's table each evening and ran my palms slowly along the grain, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something worse than being alone. I felt the fear that the only beautifully honest thing that had walked into my life since my divorce was a lie, that the bread was bait, that the silence was strategy. The workshop stayed dark for 3 days. I didn't turn on the light. My father's hand plane sat on the bench exactly where I had left it, untouched and still. The street outside was quiet, and somewhere on the other side of the fence, a woman was deciding whether to zip a suitcase shut or open a door. Monica had said one more thing before she left that second time. Standing in my doorway, her keys already in her hand, she looked at me and said, "You always trust people too easily, Garrett. That's why I left." I met her eyes and said, "No, Monica. You left because I wasn't loud enough for you." She didn't answer. Some truths don't leave room for a rebuttal. On the 4th morning, I found an envelope under my front door. Plain white, unsealed, my name written on the front in blue ink. Inside were 2 things. The first was a Polaroid photograph, faded and soft at the edges, its colors washed to amber by time. It showed my father standing in his workshop, sawdust on his apron, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, with his hand resting on the shoulder of a girl. She looked about 14 years old, dark-haired, thin, holding the hand plane with both hands like it was something precious and fragile. On the back of the photograph, in my father's handwriting, were 6 words I read 3 times before I could breathe. Lena, Mrs. Caldwell's granddaughter. Quick hands, listens to wood. The second thing in the envelope was a letter, 2 pages, handwritten in small, careful blue ink. The paper slightly wrinkled as though she had crumpled the pages into a ball, changed her mind, and then smoothed them flat again with her palms. The ink was smeared in one corner where her hand had rested too long on a wet line. I sat down at the kitchen table, my father's table, and I read every word. She told me everything. The summer she was 14, her grandmother had gotten very sick, and Lena's mother sent her to Ashland alone to help. That whole summer, Lena cooked meals, cleaned the house, sat by her grandmother's bed and spoke to almost no one. She was lonely in a way that, she wrote, felt physical, like carrying a suitcase with no handle. One afternoon, my father saw her sitting by herself on the porch, chin on her knees, staring at the empty street. He didn't ask how she was feeling. He didn't offer sympathy or small talk. He walked over and said, "You want to see something?" and brought her into the workshop. He taught her to read wood grain, how oak runs straight and tight, how pine swirls and opens up. He showed her the hand plane, how to angle the blade just right so the shaving curled off in one unbroken ribbon if the edge was sharp enough. He let her try, and when the first shaving came off clean, he nodded and said, "Quick hands." She wrote that she smiled for the first time in weeks, and while she watched him work that afternoon, he talked about his son. "Garrett," he said, "he's quiet, but he's good, like pine soft, but it doesn't break." She wrote that she had carried that sentence in her chest the way you carry a key to a house you haven't gone back to yet. For 15 years, through everything that came after, it stayed. At 22, her grandmother died. Lena sold the house, left Oregon, bounced between Portland and Seattle. She became a freelance editor. She lived alone, quietly, in small apartments with too many books and not enough light. Then she met a man, and over 4 years, he took her apart not with violence, but with a patience that was somehow worse. He controlled what she ate. He monitored who she texted and when. He told her she was imagining things when she said she was unhappy. She wrote that by the time she finally walked out, she could not remember the last decision she had made entirely for herself. At 31, carrying nothing but a suitcase, she sat in a motel room outside of Seattle and tried to remember the last time she had felt truly safe. Not happy, not comfortable, safe, and the only memory that surfaced was the workshop, the smell of pine shavings and linseed oil, a man who spoke to a frightened girl like she mattered, and the words he said about his quiet son. She searched for Siskiyou Street online. She found out that Ray Hollis had passed away 2 years before, but the house was still there, and so was his son. Her letter ended with this: "I didn't come here because I was obsessed. I came because this is the only place I ever remember feeling safe. And you are the only person, the only one who feels like that kind of safety. I'm sorry I didn't tell you from the beginning. I was afraid that if you knew, you would think I was in love with a memory, not with you. But I do love you. Not because of your father, because you left a baguette on my porch the first night I moved, in exactly the way he would have." I set the letter down on the table. I looked at the Polaroid at my father's face, at the girl holding his hand plane like a gift she didn't deserve. I looked across the room at the workbench, where that same hand plane sat right now, handle worn smooth, waiting. Then I stood up and walked next door. Her front door was unlocked. The suitcase was in the middle of the living room, open but empty, not packed, not ready, just open, like she had stood over it and couldn't decide. Lena was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, her knees drawn up, her eyes swollen and red. She didn't look up when I walked in. I sat down next to her, close enough to feel the warmth from her shoulder, but not touching. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. We sat like that for 5 minutes. Then 10. The house was perfectly still, no wind outside, no traffic, no birds in the yard. Just the two of us on a cold wooden floor, side by side, breathing. Then I said, "My dad was right about you. You're quick with your hands, but you're slow with your words." She laughed. It was small and broken and wet with tears, but it was real. The first sound I had heard from her in 4 days. I held out my hand. She took it, and she did not let go. The week after that, nothing changed in any way you could see from the outside, and that is exactly how I knew it was real. Lena still lived in her house. I still lived in mine, but in the evenings, she came over and sat on the step inside my garage while I worked. The baguettes started up again, but this time, she didn't leave them on my porch. She carried them over herself, walking through the front gate with a loaf wrapped in a kitchen towel, setting it on the workbench next to whatever I was restoring, and sitting down beside me without saying a word. I taught her how to use the hand plane, my father's hand plane. The first time she held it, her hands shook not a lot, but enough that the blade chattered against the wood. She laughed and said, 15 years ago I was better at this. I looked at her and said, 15 years ago you weren't shaking for this reason. She didn't look at me, but her ears turned red, and I noticed she didn't move away. We did not rush anything. Some nights we talked until after midnight about books, about the town, about nothing in particular. Other nights we sat in the garage without exchanging a single word for an hour, and then said goodnight. There was no performance, no pressure, no need to call it something. It felt the way work feels when the wood cooperates, slow, steady, patient, and with every pass of the sandpaper, something smoother and truer appearing underneath. By the 6th month, the suitcase was gone. I did not ask when she had moved it, but one evening, when I walked her to her front door, I glanced through the window and saw that the corner where the suitcase used to stand now held a small bookshelf. She had built it herself. It was uneven, slightly warped at the top, the joints visible and imperfect, but it was standing, and it was full of books. She was staying. That same week, Monica called one last time. She told me she and Doug had decided not to buy in Ashland after all. Too far from Portland, she said. Good luck with the neighbor, she added, but her voice was different. No edge, no sarcasm, just something quiet and tired, like a door closing for the last time without slamming. I said, "Thank you, Monica, I mean that." There was a pause on her end, 3 or 4 seconds of silence, then she hung up. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. And I think, in that silence, she finally let it go. Month 9. Winter had settled over Ashland, snow on the ground, which doesn't happen often in southern Oregon. The town was quiet. The streets along Siskiyou were white and still. I was in the workshop that evening, and for the first time since my father died, I pulled out his table, the pine kitchen table with the tapered legs. The last piece of furniture he ever built. I had not touched it in 3 years, not to oil it, not to clean it, not to repair the small chip on one corner where I bumped it during the move. It had just sat in my living room, holding its grief the way old wood holds moisture invisibly, deep in the grain. But that night, I decided to refinish it. I didn't plan it. I just walked into the workshop, set it on the sawhorses, and started sanding. Something in me was ready, and I didn't question it. Lena was sitting on the workbench behind me, reading a book with her legs tucked under her. She didn't say anything when I brought the table in. She didn't say anything when I started sanding the old finish away. She just turned pages and let me work. When I reached the final coat, a thin layer of tung oil, the same finish my father always used, the same brand in the same old tin, my hand started to shake. Not dramatically, just enough that the brush wobbled against the wood, and I could see the uneven stroke forming. I stopped, held my breath, pressed my hand flat against the tabletop to steady it, and then I felt her hand on mine. Lena had set her book down, walked over without a sound, and placed her palm gently over my knuckles. She didn't say anything. She just held her hand there, warm and still, until the shaking stopped. It took maybe 30 seconds. It felt longer. Then she said very quietly, "Your dad would have liked this finish." I didn't answer. I just turned my hand over underneath hers and held on. That was the first time I ever reached for Lena, deliberately, not by accident, not in passing, on purpose. Snow fell past the workshop window in slow, silent diagonals. Neither of us said another word for the rest of the night. 1 year after Lena moved in, she still had her house. I still had mine. But the fence between our yards now had a small gate in it. I built the frame and hung the hinges. She painted it a shade of green she picked out herself. In the mornings, she carried a baguette through that gate. In the evenings, I brought 2 cups of tea across. We didn't label what we had. We didn't post anything online. We didn't make any announcements. We just lived side by side, day after day, at a pace that fit 2 people who had both learned, in different ways, what happens when you move too fast. One morning I woke early and walked out to the workshop to start a project. But someone was already there. Lena was standing at the workbench, using my father's hand plane on a piece of pine. Her hands were steady, no trembling, no hesitation. She drew the blade across the wood in long, even strokes, and the shavings curled off the edge in unbroken ribbons, just the way my father always said they should. I looked closer. She wasn't just planing the surface, she was carving something into the wood. 2 letters, small, plain, with no decoration around them. G and L. No heart, no border, just 2 initials, bare on pine. I stood in the doorway holding my coffee, watching. She knew I was there. She always did. Without turning around, she said, "Do you want your coffee? Or do you want to stand there all day?" I set the mug down on the bench, and for the first time, I kissed her. Right there, in my father's workshop, standing on sawdust, surrounded by shavings and pine, and the faint smell of a baguette baking in her kitchen next door. No dramatic moment, no perfect lighting, just the sound of the hand plane resting on the bench, the hum of a winter morning through the walls, and 2 people who had taken a very long time to learn how to stand close without pulling away. Today is Sunday. There is a baguette on the kitchen counter, my kitchen, not Lena's, because she moved in last spring. The suitcase she used to keep in the corner of her living room is in the attic now, packed with winter blankets. My father's hand plane is still on the workbench, but the handle has 2 sets of wear marks, his and hers. Monica was right about one thing. Lena came here with a plan, but Monica got it wrong. Lena wasn't trying to claim me. She was trying to find her way back to the only place she remembered feeling safe. I just happened to be standing there, or maybe nothing about it was an accident. Maybe my father knew. He left bread at her door when she was 14. I left bread at her door when she was 34. 20 years. Same street, same loaf, same kind of man, quiet, steady, and still there in the morning. She told me I was the only man she ever let inside. But the truth is, she was the only one who never needed to knock. So let me ask you this. If someone came into your life on purpose with a plan born from love, from a memory of safety, from the deepest part of who they are, would you forgive them for not saying so sooner? And have you ever gone back to a place you used to know, only to realize you weren't looking for the place at all? You were looking for the person who made it feel like home. If this story reminded you of someone who leaves bread at your door without being asked, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, and comment below who is the person in your life who leaves the bread.